The Appalachian Sisters of Silence. Generations born without voices or names. This is the story of a family lineage so closed, so isolated from the world, that they created their own genetic prison in the mountains of West Virginia. Spring of 1978. The mist clings heavy to the Appalachian ridges near the small community of Beckley, West Virginia. Social worker Margaret Hendricks climbs a muddy trail that hasn't seen maintenance in decades. She's responding to an anonymous tip about children living in conditions that defy modern understanding. The further she walks from the main road, the more civilization seems to vanish behind her. Margaret has worked in these mountains for 15 years. She's seen poverty that would break most people's hearts. She's witnessed families struggling with coal mine closures, with hunger, with the kind of desperation that comes from being forgotten by progress. But nothing in her career has prepared her for what awaits at the end of this trail. The cabin appears suddenly through the trees. It's constructed from hand-hewn logs, weathered to a silver gray that speaks of generations without paint or proper maintenance. The roof sags dangerously in the middle. There are no power lines leading to the structure, no telephone poles, no satellite dishes or antennae. The windows are covered with what appears to be animal hides instead of glass. Margaret approaches cautiously. The smell reaches her first. It's not just unwashed bodies or poor sanitation. There's something else. Something organic and wrong that makes her stomach turn. She calls out a greeting. No response. She calls again, louder this time. The door opens slowly. A woman stands in the threshold. Margaret will later tell investigators that her first thought was that she was looking at someone from a history book. Someone who shouldn't exist in 1978. The woman is perhaps 30 years old, though her body tells the story of someone much older. She's barefoot despite the cold mountain air. Her dress is sewn from flour sacks, a practice that ended for most Appalachian families in the 1940s. But it's the woman's face that stops Margaret's breath. The eyes are set too far apart. The bridge of the nose is almost non-existent, giving her face a flat, mask-like quality. Her jaw protrudes forward in a way that makes speech clearly difficult. When she tries to speak, only guttural sounds emerge. No words, no recognizable language. Just desperate, anguished noises that communicate more than words ever could. Margaret introduces herself slowly, carefully. The woman doesn't seem to understand. Margaret tries again, using simpler words, hand gestures. Finally, recognition flickers in those widely spaced eyes. The woman steps aside, allowing Margaret to enter. The interior of the cabin is darker than the overcast day outside. As Margaret's eyes adjust, she sees movement in the shadows. Children, 3 of them huddled together on a pile of rags that serves as bedding. But these aren't normal children. Even in the dim light, Margaret can see that they share their mother's distinctive facial features. The oldest appears to be perhaps 8 years old. Her eyes are clouded with cataracts that shouldn't exist in someone so young. The middle child, a boy of maybe 6, rocks back and forth continuously, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. The youngest, a girl who can't be more than 4, lies motionless, staring at the ceiling with vacant eyes. None of them speak. They make sounds, clicks and grunts and high-pitched keening noises. But no words. It's as if language itself has been bred out of them. Margaret moves further into the cabin. In the corner, she sees an older woman. This one is perhaps 50, though, again, her body suggests someone much older. She's sitting in a wooden chair, her hands twisted with arthritis into unusable claws. Her face bears the same distinctive features as the younger woman and the children, but more pronounced, more extreme. Her jaw juts forward so far that her lower teeth extend well past her upper lip. Her eyes are milky white with blindness. Margaret asks the older woman if she's the grandmother. The woman turns toward the sound but doesn't respond. Can't respond. Like the others, she's lost the ability to form human speech. In the furthest corner of the cabin, Margaret discovers what appears to be a man. He's lying on a crude wooden platform covered with animal skins. Margaret approaches slowly. The smell intensifies. The man doesn't move as she gets closer. His breathing is shallow and labored. When Margaret gently pulls back the animal skin covering him, she has to fight to keep from gasping. The man's body is a catalog of genetic disasters. His limbs are twisted in ways that speak of bones that never formed correctly. His hands have only 3 fingers each, fused together in a way that makes any kind of manual work impossible. His face carries the same flat, widely spaced features as the others, but his skull is misshapen, bulging in some places and severely depressed in others. He appears to be in constant pain, moaning softly with each breath. Margaret later estimates his age at around 35, but diseases that typically affect the elderly have already ravaged his body. His joints are swollen and deformed with arthritis. His skin shows signs of advanced aging and multiple untreated infections. His eyes, like the old woman's, are clouded with cataracts. Margaret steps back, her mind racing. This isn't just poverty. This isn't just neglect. This is something far more sinister. These people share such similar features, such identical genetic abnormalities, that there can be only one explanation. They're not just related. Quote, they're the product of generation after generation of the closest possible blood unions. Margaret tries to communicate with the young woman again. She asks about food, about medical care, about other family members. The woman responds with desperate gestures, pulling Margaret toward a corner of the cabin where dried corn and beans are stored in clay pots. It's barely enough to feed one person, let alone 6. She gestures toward the twisted man in the corner, making sounds that might be distress or grief or both. Then the young woman does something that will haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. She picks up a wooden board with crude marks carved into it. Noches and lines that mean nothing to Margaret at first. But then she realizes what she's looking at. It's a calendar, a record-keeping system. And there are far more marks than should exist for just the people in this cabin. Margaret asks through gestures, "Are there others? More family members?" The young woman nods vigorously. She points up, to the mountain, to somewhere higher in these isolated peaks. Margaret makes a decision. She needs help. She needs law enforcement, medical professionals, people who can document what she's found. But she also needs to see what else exists up that mountain, how deep this tragedy runs. She tells the young woman through gestures that she'll return, that she'll bring help. The young woman's face crumbles. She grabs Margaret's arm with surprising strength, making sounds that are unmistakably pleading. "Don't go. Don't leave us. They've been alone so long." But Margaret has to go. She has to bring the world to this forgotten place. She promises through gestures that she'll return before nightfall. The young woman slowly releases her grip. As Margaret makes her way back down the mountain, she realizes she's shaking. Not from cold, from horror. From the understanding that somewhere in these mountains, cut off from society, a family has been reproducing within its own bloodline for so long that they've created people who can no longer speak, can no longer see, can no longer exist as normal human beings. Confear if you're already subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to witness over these next 4 chapters will challenge everything. You thought you knew about the hidden horrors that existed in isolated America, and you'll want to be here when we reveal the darkest secrets of the mountain families who disappeared from history itself. Margaret reaches the sheriff's office as the sun begins to set. Sheriff Tom Bradley has served Raleigh County for 23 years. He's seen moonshine operations, domestic situations, the occasional serious crime. But when Margaret describes what she's found, his weathered face goes pale. He makes phone calls to the state health department, to a doctor he trusts in town, to 2 of his deputies. Within an hour, a team is assembled. They'll go up that mountain at first light. They'll document everything, and they'll begin to unravel a mystery that has its roots in the earliest days of Appalachian settlement. That night, Margaret can't sleep. She keeps seeing those faces, those twisted bodies, those children who will never speak their own names. Because somewhere in their family's past, someone made a choice. Someone decided that keeping bloodlines pure, keeping family together, keeping secrets hidden was more important than the health and humanity of future generations. And tomorrow, the world will finally see what that choice created. Dawn breaks cold over the West Virginia mountains on March 23, 1978. The team assembles at the base of the trail. Sheriff Bradley, 2 deputies, Margaret Hendricks, Dr. Robert Chun from the State Health Department, and a photographer named James Walsh, who's been contracted to document whatever they find. The climb takes longer than Margaret remembers from the previous day. Dr. Chun struggles with the steep terrain. He's a city doctor, more accustomed to hospital corridors and mountain trails. But he's also one of the few physicians in the state with experience in genetic abnormalities. If anyone can make sense of what Margaret described, it's him. They reach the cabin as the morning mist begins to lift. The young woman is standing outside as if she's been waiting for them. When she sees Margaret, her face transforms with something that might be relief, or hope, or perhaps just the desperate gratitude of someone who's been invisible for so long. Dr. Chun approaches slowly, his medical bag in hand. He introduces himself, though it's clear the young woman doesn't understand his words. But she understands his intent. She leads him inside. What follows is the most thorough medical examination possible under the circumstances. Dr. Chun examines each family member carefully, taking notes in a leather journal. The photographer documents everything. The deputies stand guard outside, their faces grim, Dr. Chun discovers that the young woman, who appears to be the primary caretaker of the group, has severe vision problems that have gone untreated for years. Her teeth are in advanced stages of decay, with several already lost. Her fingers show signs of early arthritis despite her young age. Most concerning, she has a heart murmur that Dr. Chun suspects is a congenital defect that has progressively worsened. The children present even more severe conditions. The oldest child to go with cataracts is also deaf. She's never heard human speech, never learned to communicate beyond basic gestures. The boy with the twisted neck has seizures. His mother demonstrates through panicked gestures how he convulses several times a day, sometimes falling and injuring himself further. The youngest child appears to have significant cognitive impairments. She doesn't respond to stimuli, doesn't react to movement or sound. She simply lies on her bedding, existing but not truly living. The twisted man in the corner presents the most extreme case. Dr. Chun's examination reveals bones that never fused properly, joints that formed incorrectly, organs that are failing. He estimates the man is in his early 30s, but his body has the deterioration of someone in their 70s. He's in constant pain, unable to move without assistance, unable to feed himself, unable to communicate beyond moans and cries. The older woman, presumably the mother of the twisted man and the young woman, has gone completely blind from untreated cataracts. Her joints are so severely arthritic that she can no longer care for herself. She requires feeding, cleaning, constant attention. Dr. Chun takes Sheriff Bradley aside. His voice is low but urgent. These aren't random medical conditions. These are classic signs of extreme consanguinity. Close blood relations reproducing over multiple generations. The genetic damage is catastrophic. These people are suffering from what geneticists call inbreeding depression. Their bodies are literally breaking down because their genetic diversity has been eliminated. But the bigger question remains, where did this family come from? How long has this been happening? And most importantly, are there more of them? Margaret tells the sheriff about the calendar, about the young woman's gestures indicating more family members higher up the mountain. Sheriff Bradley makes a decision. They need to explore further. They need to understand the full scope of this situation. The young woman, understanding their intent, begins making gestures. She points to a trail that leads further up the mountainside. She uses her hands to indicate numbers, more people, more family, a whole community hidden in these peaks. The team begins the second climb. The trail is even less maintained than the first. At points, it's barely visible. They're following game paths more than human roads. The photographer struggles with his equipment. Dr. Chun has to stop frequently to catch his breath. But they push forward. After nearly 2 hours of climbing, they reach a clearing, and what they see stops them all in their tracks. There are 4 more structures. Calling them cabins would be generous. They're crude shelters constructed from logs and stones and mud. Some have partially collapsed roofs. Others have walls that are more gap than solid structure. Smoke rises from one, suggesting someone has managed to build a fire. As the team approaches, figures emerge from the structures. More family members. Margaret counts quickly. 7 more individuals, all showing the same distinctive facial features, all bearing the marks of severe genetic damage. An old man, perhaps 70 years old, crawls out of the nearest shelter. He can't walk. His legs are twisted beneath him, useless. He drags himself forward using his arms, which are themselves deformed but functional enough for locomotion. His face carries the extreme version of the features they've seen. His jaw extends so far forward that his mouth can't close properly. Drool runs continuously down his chin. His eyes are vacant, showing no recognition of the strangers before him. 2 women, twins by the look of them, stand in the doorway of another shelter. They're holding hands, moving in perfect synchronization. They're perhaps 40 years old, both completely bald, both with the telltale facial abnormalities. They make no sound, just watch with identical expressions of confusion and fear. A young man, maybe 25, sits against a tree. His head is enormous, clearly suffering from hydrocephalus that has never been treated. The fluid buildup in his skull has distorted his features beyond recognition. He rocks back and forth, making a rhythmic humming sound that never varies in pitch or volume. 3 children huddle together near what appears to be a cooking fire. 2 boys and a girl, ages ranging from perhaps 5 to 10. All 3 have the widely spaced eyes and flat facial features. The oldest boy has club feet that have forced him to develop a painful-looking crawling method of locomotion. The girl's hands are fused into useless clubs. The youngest boy appears unable to focus his eyes on anything, suggesting severe vision problems or possibly blindness. Dr. Chun moves through the clearing, examining each person as best he can under the circumstances. The photographer documents everything. The deputies help restrain individuals when the doctor needs to conduct more thorough examinations. What emerges is a picture of genetic disasters spanning multiple generations. Dr. Chun explains to Sheriff Bradley that based on the severity and similarity of the conditions, this family has been intermarrying for at least 5 generations, possibly more. Parents with children, siblings with siblings, uncles with nieces. The closest possible blood relationships repeated over and over until the genetic damage became impossible to hide. Sheriff Bradley asks the question everyone is thinking: how did this happen? How did a family become so isolated that this was allowed to continue for generations? Margaret notices something. In the center of the clearing, there's a structure that's different from the others. It's larger, more solidly built. And it has a door that's closed, unlike the others which have only animal skin coverings. She approaches carefully. She knocks. No response. She calls out, "Nothing." She looks at Sheriff Bradley, who nods. One of the deputies steps forward and pushes the door open. Inside, they find an old woman. She's sitting in a rocking chair, dressed in clothing that looks like it came from the 1800s. Her hair is white and reaches past her waist, uncut for what must be decades. Her face carries the genetic markers they've seen in all the others. But there's something different in her eyes. Recognition, intelligence, awareness. Unlike the others, this woman can speak. Her voice is raspy from disuse, her words slurred by her malformed jaw, but she can form sentences. She looks at the intruders and asks a simple question in a thick Appalachian dialect that's barely comprehensible. "Why did you come here?" "We didn't ask for the world to find us." The woman in the rocking chair identifies herself as Mabel, just Mabel. She refuses to give a last name. She's 83 years old, though she looks far older. She's the oldest living member of this mountain family, and she's the keeper of their darkest secrets. Sheriff Bradley sits across from her, his notebook open. Dr. Chun stands nearby, listening intently. Margaret positions herself where she can see Mabel's face clearly. The photographer waits respectfully outside. This isn't a moment for pictures. Mabel begins to talk. Her story comes out slowly, painfully, like a wound being opened after years of festering in darkness. She was born in these mountains in 1895. Her father was a coal miner who moved his family deeper and deeper into the wilderness to escape the mining companies. He didn't trust outsiders, didn't trust the government, didn't trust anyone who wasn't blood. Mabel's father had 11 children with her mother. When Mabel's mother died in childbirth with the 12th, her father made a decision that would doom generations. He declared that his children would only marry within the family, that the bloodline must remain pure, that the family must remain isolated from the corruption of the outside world. Mabel was 14 when her father forced her to become the partner of her own brother Samuel. She weeps as she tells this part of the story. She didn't want it. She tried to run away twice, but her father caught her both times and beat her until she couldn't walk. He told her it was God's will, that families in the Bible kept their blood pure, that this was what righteous people did. Mabel had 6 children with Samuel. 3 died in infancy, their bodies too damaged by the close blood relationship to survive. Of the 3 who lived, all showed signs of the genetic problems that would only worsen with each generation. Deformed joints, vision problems, difficulty with speech. When Mabel's children reached adolescence, her father enforced the same rules. Brother with sister, first cousin with first cousin. The family remained isolated on the mountain. They grew what food they could. They hunted and trapped. They had no contact with the outside world except for one trip a year to a distant town to trade furs for salt and flour. The genetic damage accelerated with each generation. Mabel's grandchildren were worse than her children. Her great-grandchildren were worse still. The ability to speak correctly began to disappear. Vision problems became blindness. Minor joint issues became severe deformities. Mabel describes watching her family literally destroy itself through its own bloodline. Children born with twisted spines. Babies who couldn't breathe properly. Young people going blind before they reached 20. The constant pain of joints that didn't form correctly. The isolation of people who couldn't communicate with words. She tells them about the children who died. So many children who died, some at birth, others within days or weeks. A few who lived for several years before their damaged bodies simply gave out. She estimates that for every family member currently alive on this mountain, 3 or 4 have died from their genetic conditions. Sheriff Bradley asks her why she didn't leave. why she didn't seek help, why she allowed this to continue for generations. Mabel's answer is simple and devastating. Where would we go? Who would take us? Look at us, we're monsters. Her father told us that the outside world would lock us away, study us like animals, separate us forever. We believed him, and maybe he was right. She talks about the few times people from the outside world came close to their settlement. Hunters, forest rangers. Once in the 1950s, a surveying crew working on expanding the national forest. Each time the family hid. They stayed silent in their cabins until the outsiders left. They were more afraid of the world than they were of their own suffering, Dr. Chun asks. Mabel, if she understands what has happened to her family, if she comprehends that the close blood relationships have caused the medical problems. Mabel nods slowly. She says she's known for years. She's watched each generation become more damaged than the last. She's seen the progression of genetic deterioration with her own eyes. But by the time she understood what was happening, it was too late. The family was trapped. The damage was done. And the old rules, her father's rules, were so ingrained that no one questioned them anymore. Margaret asks about the young woman in the lower cabin, about her children. Mabel's face crumbles. That's Rebecca, she says. My great-great-granddaughter. The twisted man in the cabin is Thomas. He's Rebecca's uncle and the father of her children. Rebecca didn't choose him. Thomas didn't choose her. It's just what happens here. It's all we know. The room falls silent. Even Sheriff Bradley, who's seen the darkest aspects of human nature in his career, struggles to comprehend the scope of this tragedy. A family that has been destroying itself for 4 generations, hidden in these mountains, suffering in isolation and silence. Mabel looks directly at the sheriff. Her clouded eyes somehow still convey intense emotion. She asks a question that will haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. What happens to us now? Can you fix what we've become? Can you undo 80 years of suffering? If you're watching this and feeling the weight of Rebecca's tragedy, if you can imagine the voiceless plea of a young woman who never had a choice in her own suffering, type in the comments right now. Rebecca deserved better. Let us know you hear these silenced voices from the past. Sheriff Bradley promises Mabel that they'll bring help. Medical care, food, proper shelter. But even as he speaks, he knows the truth. There's no fixing what has been done to these people. There's no reversing generations of genetic damage. There's only management, comfort, and ensuring that no more children are born into this nightmare. Mabel nods as if she already knew this answer. She asks one more favor. When you take us away from this mountain, she says, keep us together. We're damaged, we're broken, but we're family. It's all we have. The team spends the rest of the day documenting the settlement. They count 13 living family members total. They photograph the conditions. They take basic medical notes. They inventory the meager food supplies. As the sun begins to set, they make their way back down the mountain. They'll return tomorrow with more resources, with ambulances if they can get them up the trails, with enough medical personnel to begin the process of bringing these people into the modern world. That night, Margaret sits in her office, unable to process what she's witnessed. She keeps thinking about Rebecca, about a young woman who never learned to speak because her family's bloodline had become so damaged that language itself was bred away, about children born into suffering they never chose and could never escape. And she thinks about Mabel's question, what happens to them now? Because the truth is there's no good answer. There's no happy ending waiting for a family that has spent 4 generations destroying itself in isolation and fear. The operation to evacuate the Mountain family begins on March 25, 1978. The state mobilizes resources that haven't been used since the devastating floods of 1972. Ambulances modified for rough terrain. Medical personnel trained in extreme rural care. Social workers prepared for the most challenging placement cases of their careers. The media gets wind of the story. Not the full details, not yet, but enough. Reporters begin arriving in Beckley asking questions, trying to find the location of the mysterious Mountain family. Sheriff Bradley coordinates with state police to establish a perimeter. No reporters, no cameras. These people have suffered enough without becoming a spectacle. The evacuation takes 3 days. Each family member must be carefully transported down trails that were never meant for stretchers or wheelchairs. The twisted man, Thomas, requires 4 people to carry him. He cries out in pain with every movement. Rebecca walks down holding the hands of both her older children, the youngest strapped to her back in a makeshift carrier. The old crawling man has to be sedated before transport. His distress at being moved from the only home he's ever known is too severe. They're taken to a state facility in Charleston. It's not a hospital, though doctors are present. It's not a mental institution, though psychiatric care is provided. It's something in between. A place where people who don't fit into normal categories can be cared for while decisions are made about their futures. Dr. Chun conducts comprehensive medical examinations. What he discovers is documented in reports that will later be sealed by court order. But Margaret sees the preliminary findings. They're worse than anyone imagined. Every single family member suffers from multiple genetic disorders. The most common are cranial facial abnormalities, skeletal deformities, vision impairment ranging from severe myopia to complete blindness, hearing loss, cognitive impairments, and premature aging. Several members show signs of conditions that typically appear in elderly populations despite being in their 20s or 30s. 3 of the children, including Rebecca's youngest, have such severe cognitive impairments that they'll never be able to care for themselves. They require constant supervision and assistance with every basic function. 2 of the adult men, including Thomas, have progressive neurological conditions that are essentially untreatable with 1970s medical technology. They're dying slowly, their damaged nervous systems shutting down piece by piece. The vision problems are universal. Only 4 of the 13 family members have vision that's correctable with glasses. The others range from legally blind to completely without sight. The hearing problems are nearly as common. 6 family members have significant hearing loss. 3 are completely deaf. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery is the developmental damage. Most of the family members function at the level of young children, regardless of their actual age. Years of isolation, lack of proper nutrition, lack of intellectual stimulation, and genetic damage have left them unable to learn basic skills. Reading is impossible. Writing is impossible. Even basic counting is beyond most of them. The one exception is Mabel. Despite her physical deterioration, her mind remains sharp. She becomes the intermediary between her family and the outside world. She translates their gestures and sounds. She explains their needs. She holds their hands when the doctors and social workers perform examinations that terrify them. The state government faces an unprecedented situation. What do you do with 13 people who are so genetically damaged that they can't function in normal society? How do you care for them? Where do you place them? Who pays for their care? Legal proceedings begin to determine guardianship. The family has no assets, no property they can sell. The land they lived on wasn't even theirs. They were squatters on national forest land. They have no birth certificates, no social security numbers. According to official records, most of them don't exist. A team of lawyers works to establish legal identities for the family members. It's complicated. Birth dates can only be estimated. Family relationships are so intertwined that creating accurate family trees is nearly impossible. Is Rebecca Thomas's daughter, niece, or both? Is the old crawling man Mabel's son, grandson, or great-grandson? The bloodlines are so tangled that definitive answers don't exist. Meanwhile, news of the discovery spreads beyond West Virginia. Geneticists from universities request permission to study the family. Anthropologists want to document their isolated culture. Even medical ethicists weigh in, debating whether the family should be kept together or separated to prevent any possibility of further interbreeding. Margaret becomes the family's fiercest advocate. She fights against the scientists who want to study them. She argues against separating them into different facilities. She pushes for them to be treated as victims, not as curiosities or research subjects. In April of 1978, a judge makes a ruling. The family will be kept together as much as possible. They'll be housed in a specialized care facility that's being established specifically for them. They'll receive medical care, physical therapy, educational services adapted to their abilities. And most importantly, they'll be protected from public exposure. The judge also rules that no further reproduction will be permitted. The 3 women of childbearing age, including Rebecca, will receive medical interventions to prevent pregnancy. It's controversial. It raises ethical questions that have no easy answers. But the judge decides that allowing more children to be born into this genetic nightmare would be unconscionable. Thomas dies on April 18, 1978. His body simply gives out. His nervous system, damaged by generations of inbreeding, finally stops functioning. He's 31 years old. Rebecca is present when he passes. She makes sounds that might be grief, or they might be relief. It's impossible to tell. Thomas is buried in a small cemetery outside Charleston. Mabel insists on a proper Christian burial. She says her father, despite everything he did, was a religious man. He would have wanted his descendants buried in consecrated ground. 9 family members attend the funeral. The others are too medically fragile to make the trip. Rebecca stands at the graveside holding her children. She doesn't cry. She makes no sound. She simply stares at the coffin being lowered into the ground. The father of her children, her uncle, her only companion for years. Whatever complex feelings she has no words to express them. After the funeral, Margaret drives Rebecca back to the facility. During the ride, Rebecca does something unexpected. She reaches over and takes Margaret's hand. She squeezes it gently. It's the first voluntary physical contact Rebecca has initiated with anyone from the outside world. Margaret understands. It's Rebecca's way of saying thank you. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for ending the cycle. Thank you for making sure my children won't have to continue this nightmare. Over the following months, the family slowly adapts to their new life. Some adjustments are successful. Others are painful failures. The youngest children seem to benefit most from the care and stimulation. Their development, while still significantly delayed, shows some improvement. The adults struggle more. Years of isolation and hardship can't be easily overcome. Mabel becomes something of a celebrity within the facility. Staff members are fascinated by her stories of mountain life, by her descriptions of a way of living that hasn't existed in America for over a century, by her intelligence and awareness despite the genetic damage her body has sustained. In June of 1978, Mabel agrees to be interviewed by a sociologist from West Virginia University. The interview is recorded on cassette tape and will later become one of the few primary sources documenting the family's history. In it, Mabel speaks with brutal honesty about the suffering her family endured. She doesn't excuse it. She doesn't romanticize it. She simply states the facts of their existence. Toward the end of the interview, the sociologist asks Mabel if she has any regrets. Mabel is silent for a long moment. Then she says something that will be quoted in academic papers for decades to come. I regret that I didn't have the courage to walk away. I regret that I let fear keep me on that mountain. I regret every child born into suffering because I was too afraid to break the rules. But most of all, I regret that we believed the lie that blood purity was more important than human dignity. The facility that houses the Mountain family becomes a model for specialized care of individuals with complex genetic and developmental conditions. Medical professionals from across the country visit to observe the protocols and treatments being developed. The family, despite their suffering, inadvertently advances medical understanding of inbreeding depression in humans. Dr. Chun publishes a paper in 1979 titled Genetic Consequences of Extreme Consanguinity, a case study from rural Appalachia. He changes all names and identifying details to protect the family's privacy. The paper becomes one of the most cited works in the field of human genetics. It provides clear documentation of what happens when bloodlines become too closed. When genetic diversity is eliminated through generations of the closest possible relations. The paper describes in clinical detail the progression of genetic damage across the generations. How the first generation showed relatively minor problems, joint issues, slight facial abnormalities, but how each subsequent generation accelerated the deterioration. How by the fourth and fifth generations, basic human functions like speech and sight were compromised. How the family was literally destroying itself at the genetic level. The paper also addresses the social and psychological aspects. How isolation reinforced harmful practices. How fear of the outside world trapped people in cycles of suffering. How ignorance of basic genetics allowed the situation to continue long past the point where the damage became obvious. Dr. Chun's work sparks a broader conversation about isolated communities and genetic health. Researchers begin studying other isolated populations, small island communities, remote mountain settlements, religious groups that practice endogamy. And what they find is that while few situations are as extreme as the West Virginia Mountain family, the pattern of genetic damage from inbreeding exists in more places than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Meanwhile, the family continues their daily existence. Some members show improvement with proper nutrition and medical care, others decline. The old crawling man dies in October of 1978. One of the twin women passes in January of 1979. They're buried next to Thomas in the Charleston Cemetery. Mabel's health deteriorates through 1979. The arthritis that twisted her hands spreads to her spine. The cataracts that clouded her vision finally steal her sight completely. By December, she's bedridden. Margaret visits her regularly, reading to her, keeping her company. On January 3, 1980, Mabel asks Margaret to bring Rebecca to her bedside. Rebecca comes, leading her oldest daughter by the hand. Mabel can't see them, but she reaches out until her gnarled hands find Rebecca's face. She traces the features she knows are there. the widely spaced eyes, the flat nose bridge, the pronounced jaw, all the markers of genetic damage that define their family. Mabel speaks to Rebecca. Her voice is weak but clear. She speaks in the mountain dialect that Rebecca has heard all her life but never learned to speak herself. She tells Rebecca that she's sorry for being too weak to change things. Sorry for not protecting her. Sorry for the life Rebecca was forced to live. Rebecca doesn't understand all the words, but she understands the emotion. She leans forward and presses her forehead against Mabel's. They stay like that for a long time. The oldest and one of the youngest of their damaged bloodline, connected by tragedy and survival. Mabel dies on January 6, 1980. She's 84 years old. Her funeral is attended by the surviving family members, facility staff, Margaret, Dr. Chun, and Sheriff Bradley. As Mabel's coffin is lowered into the ground, Rebecca makes sounds that aren't quite words but communicate profound loss. After Mabel's death, the family's connection to their past begins to fade. Without her stories, without her memories, their history starts to slip away. The younger children have no recollection of life on the mountain. The older ones remember it as a nightmare they can't fully articulate. By 1985, only 8 family members remain alive. 5 have died from various complications of their genetic conditions. The survivors range in age from 12 to 53. They've adapted as much as they can to facility life. Some have learned basic communication skills. Others remain locked in silence. Rebecca's children grow up in the facility. They receive education appropriate to their abilities. The oldest daughter learns basic sign language, giving her a way to communicate for the first time in her life. The son's seizures are controlled with medication that wasn't available on the mountain. The youngest daughter remains profoundly impaired but receives physical therapy that improves her quality of life. In 1990, the state reviews the family's situation. The specialized facility has become too expensive to maintain for such a small population. A decision is made to move the surviving family members to different care facilities based on their individual needs. Margaret fights against the separation but ultimately loses. Rebecca and her 3 children are moved to a group home for individuals with developmental disabilities in Huntington. 2 other family members go to a nursing home in Parkersburg. The remaining 3 are placed in separate facilities based on their specific medical needs. The family that spent 80 years together on an isolated mountain that suffered through generations of genetic damage rather than separate is finally divided. It's presented as what's best for their individual care. Maybe it is. But it's also the final dissolution of their bloodline's identity. Margaret retires from social services in 1995. She's 58 years old. She's spent 17 years advocating for the mountain family. She's watched them suffer, adapt, and slowly disappear. At her retirement party, someone asks her what case affected her most in her career. She doesn't hesitate. The Sisters of Silence, she says, using the nickname facility staff gave to Rebecca and her daughters. Because they taught me that sometimes the cruelest prisons are the ones built by family. That blood relationships can be chains as strong as any metal. And that silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's the sound of voices that were bred away by generations of suffering. Rebecca dies in 2003. She's 48 years old. Her body, damaged by genetics and years of hardship on the mountain, simply wears out. Her 3 children survive her. They're adults now, as much as their conditions allow. They live in different facilities. They have no contact with each other. The staff at each facility is unaware of their shared history. By 2010, only 2 members of the mountain family remain alive. A man in his 60s living in a nursing home in Morgantown, and Rebecca's oldest daughter, who's in her 30s and living in an assisted living facility in Wheeling. They've never met. They're separated by too many miles and too much administrative bureaucracy. The man dies in 2014. Rebecca's daughter continues living, cared for by staff who don't know her history, who don't know about the isolated mountain settlement, who don't know about 80 years of genetic damage and enforced isolation. To them, she's just another resident with complex needs and limited communication abilities. The records of the mountain family are sealed by court order. The location of their settlement is kept confidential to prevent curiosity seekers and reporters from turning it into a tourist destination. The graves in Charleston have markers with names but no dates or family connections. To any casual observer, they're just another series of burial plots. Dr. Chun's research paper remains in circulation, but with so many identifying details changed that connecting it to the real family is nearly impossible. The cassette recording of Mabel's interview sits in a university archive, cataloged but rarely accessed. The photographs taken during the initial discovery are locked in state files, available only to researchers with specific clearances. The mountain family's story becomes a footnote in medical literature, a cautionary tale in genetics textbooks, a whispered legend in Appalachian communities. But the real people, the ones who suffered for generations in silence and isolation, fade from memory. Sometimes hikers in the national forest near Beckley stumble across the ruins of the settlement. Collapsed cabins, overgrown clearings, stone fire pits slowly being reclaimed by the forest. They take pictures. They speculate about who lived there. They create romantic stories about mountain hermits and self-sufficient pioneers. They don't know about Rebecca, who never learned to speak, about Thomas, whose body was so twisted he could barely move, about Mabel, who watched her family destroy itself and lacked the courage to stop it, about the children born into suffering they never chose and couldn't escape. The forest keeps their secrets. The mountains stand silent over the tragedy that unfolded in their shadows. And the voices that were bred away by generations of closed bloodlines remain unheard. But their story matters. It matters because it's a reminder of what happens when isolation and ignorance combine with harmful traditions. It matters because it shows how quickly human dignity can be sacrificed to preserve bloodline purity. It matters because somewhere in those mountains for 80 years, people suffered in ways that should never happen in civilized society. If you've watched until the end of this investigation, if you've witnessed the tragic legacy of the Sisters of Silence, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we continue to bring you the hidden, heartbreaking truths that history tried to forget. Leave a comment saying I watched until the end, so we can know who stays to honor these silenced voices. Hit the like button if this story moved you to remember that behind every genetic tragedy are real human lives that deserved better. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that isolation and closed bloodlines create suffering that echoes across generations. The Appalachian Sisters of Silence. Generations born without voices or names. Their tragedy ended, but their story remains a testament to human suffering, a warning about the cost of isolation, and a reminder that sometimes the darkest horrors happen not in the spotlight, but in the forgotten places where no one is watching.